So I'm going to walk around and ask questions while I'm waiting and actually do something interesting rather than everyone just sitting there looking at their phones. so I'm going to start with you. So you're a cloudy guy, right?
I am sure, yes.
Okay, so is the cloud secure?
Well, I'd have to say yes because it's where I work.
No. Go, an honest answer.
An honest answer? It's only as secure as you make it.
That's a bit vague. Anything more specific?
Like any environment, you can shoot yourself in the foot if you do the wrong thing.
Okay, fair enough. And what would be a good example of a wrong thing?
Leaving the debug settings on in your application when you deploy it to production.
Like Patreon?
Yes, yeah.
Are we meant to talk about people who get breached in here? Or?
I don't think it's been recorded yet, right? So you should be all right.
No, okay, all right. No one paying attention. Thanks, okay, Simon, that's one. We'll ask someone else. We'll ask Lars. Okay, Lars. You look like you got nothing better to do. What do you reckon, mate? Cloud secure?
I'm kind of with Simon, really. It's not if you don't know what you're doing, I think.
So not if you don't know what you're doing, but...
Well, if you know what you're doing and you know what the proper practices are, I guess it's you could make it secure, I'd say, but you got to have the right attitude, the right approach.
All right, what about this? What would you not put in the cloud? And this can be like a personal cloud use answer as well. And you're laughing so much that I really want to hear the answer now.
Yeah.
You've got photos with your missus, haven't you?
It's actually your mum.
Jeez, okay, I'm going to ask somebody else a question. Right, ask someone else. What about up here? So, would you trust the cloud?
I think I am.
You're not sure, which may actually explain why you've come to my session as well, which is probably a good idea. So, what would you like to know today in this session? Because we got times, you can tell me what you want to hear.
Actually, I don't know much about the Azure environment, so just want to know whatever you say.
Okay, well, we can do that. You can know whatever I say. We'll work that out. What about you, mate? What do you reckon? Cloud secure? Insecure?
I wouldn't trust anything, but...
Oh, good answer. Next person. No, okay, go on.
But I reckon in general it's better to trust putting your stuff in the cloud than trying to host it yourself.
Okay, all right. So you don't trust yourself, but you trust Microsoft, or the others.
It's a matter of degrees of trust.
Yeah, right. Would you without saying where you work, would you trust your IT guys?
Yeah, oh yeah.
All right. Yeah, good answer. Oh, you're the IT guy. All right. Who else? What about you, mate? Would you trust the cloud? What do you reckon?
I'd say 50% I would trust, but there's still some elements that you can't trust, and you can't trust the environment, so you need to make it secure.
Yeah, right. So what's the 50% you trust?
I don't know, I haven't played with the cloud much, but based on what I've seen, if you put a VM, you can still put some really good controls around it. But if you put a website out there, there's various exploits that people can make use of.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm going to disagree with you when I have the talk, but thank you anyway. But it's interesting, right? Because everyone's got their own views. We'll see what the other side of the room says. What about... I've asked Simon. He says it's all fantastic because he sells the stuff. What about you, mate? Cloud secure, insecure?
I suppose it's more secure than...
Whoa, I'm pointing towards the thing. Go, try again.
I think it's more secure than, what your local sysadmin would set it up as, but it depends on how well you've configured it, I suppose.
Wow, so you really don't like your sysadmin, do you? Where do you work? No, don't worry. Don't answer that because they might record it. Sorry. All right, what about you? What do you think, mate? Secure, insecure? What do you like or worry about with the cloud?
I think it's reasonably secure, but I think there's a lot of the proofs not necessarily out there for legislative organisations to let some of the sensitive data go to the cloud.
Yeah, so there's a good one, legislative. We better cover that. Who likes working with legislation with the cloud stuff? Oh, crickets. Okay, interesting. But over here, I can sit down if I come over here. What do you reckon, mate? Cloud secure, insecure?
I don't even trust my own code.
Yes, okay.
Test everything.
All right, test everything. But if you had to run your own untrustworthy code, would you trust the cloud? Good thing, bad thing?
I'm neutral on it. There's good things, there's bad things. You just got to be careful what you use. Be careful how you use it.
Okay, interesting. So the room is kind of divided now. This lady's looking at her phone, so I don't come over and talk to her, so I'll ask you. What do you think, cloud?
We haven't used it at work yet, so I'm just learning, and I don't think I trust it that much.
Okay, interesting. And why do you say that? Is it because it's like it makes really, really bad news headlines, or?
No, it's just my suspicious nature.
Okay, suspicious nature. Do you trust your IT guys and girls?
To a degree, yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so everything is sort of degrees here, isn't it? Let me see. All right, I've got a few minutes. Let's try one more. What about you, mate? What do you reckon? Cloud, good thing, bad thing, secure, insecure?
Personally, very insecure.
Insecure, okay. Why's that?
It's probably the bad news, and you got your personal data on it, and it just feels
Okay.
that you don't own it, and you know.
And what sort of personal data do you put on there?
I don't put in much on it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Do you have like a MyGov account?
What again?
Like a MyGov, Australian government account?
No, I don't.
Do you pay tax?
Well, I do pay tax, but that I don't think, you know.
Ah, well, then you have an account. Congratulations, you're on the cloud. You're kind of on there whether you like it or not these days, aren't you? Oh, here's another. Oh, wow, that's one of those new iPad Pro massive things. Wow. So that's an iPad. So that's very, very cloud connected, isn't it?
Yep, sure is.
And how do you feel about that?
It's,
He's thinking about it.
I try and use two-factor and that kind of thing wherever I can to lock things down, but yeah, it's a bit of a risk.
All right, awesome. And do you sync photos to iCloud, iMessage, all the iThingies that go into iCloud? Yeah, so do I. I mean, maybe some people think I was going to say no, but that's the problem, isn't it? It's like the convenience factor. All right, that's cool. That's gone. Okay. So it's really interesting because everyone's sort of got like different opinions, and some of them are opposing and some of them are on the fence, and some people don't even know, which is probably a good reason to come to a talk like this, actually. So I want to try and address a bunch of the things that that some people raised today, because we had things like legislation come up, right? As well as this sort of issue of degrees. And I really like the fact that a number of people said degrees, because I don't think that this is sort of a Boolean state. But as we go through, what I want to do today is sort of probe away at that question a little bit, that is the cloud secure question. And I'm going to give you a bit of an anecdote from my own personal experience of is it or is it not secure. And then I'm going to do all the demos we can until we run out of time or Azure stops working in some sort of a random nature, which it can be prone to do. So let me jump into it. And I want to start with a little bit of background about some of the things I've been doing. Now, who here came to my talk yesterday? Oh, wow, you've all come back, right? It's like a lot of you. So I'll go through this relatively briefly then, but for those of you who don't know me or didn't come to my talk yesterday, I do a bunch of stuff with Azure, and I do a lot of security stuff. And one of the things I do, which is kind of like the perfect match of both of these, is I run this service up here. Have I been pwned? Who's used this before? And keep your hand up if you have been pwned. It's a lot of people. Keep your hand up if it was in Ashley Madison. Good answer. That is the right answer. Regardless, that is the right answer. So this site aggregates data breaches. So what I do is every time there's a great big data breach which hits the news, often it comes out of a cloud service, I load the data in here and I make it available for people to search so you can figure out if you were compromised in a data breach or not. And it does things like sends off notifications and stuff like that so you get told as soon as it happens. All free, it's a community project, it's all a bunch of fun in terms of looking at how Azure works. Not so much fun for the people who were in Ashley Madison. Now, I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about the security of how I do this, because this site gets hammered. The number of times I see, whether it be random bots or very targeted attacks of people trying to break through this. I mean, it is many times every single day. And this is kind of the paradox of having something that becomes quite successful. Everybody wants to break into it. So the number of things I've learned as I've gone through running this project, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of a sense of scale. And I'm going to show a few things I touched on yesterday and a few new things as well. So one of them is, when I was running this service and this big Ashley Madison data breach happened, which I'm sure all of you have heard about, whether you want to admit it, prior knowledge of it or not, when it happened, things went nuts. And it scaled somewhere around 55,000% overnight. So I went from hundreds of sessions per hour up to about 55,000 something sessions. Now, incidentally as well, Google Analytics always reads low. Everyone know why that is? Because you're all paranoid and you use trackers and ad blockers, and it stops the Google Analytics widget. So every time you see a Google Analytics stat, from what I've seen, they're often about 20% down on what they should be. So you could add quite a big whack to this. Numbers get much, much higher. So anyway, I've run this site, huge amount of traffic, and one of the really interesting things about running on Azure, and I'll get to the security angles on this as well, is that it's really neat to be able to get analytics and data out about how the thing is running. Now, what you're looking at here is actually a New Relic graph, and you get New Relic for free with an Azure web app, also known as an Azure website. And we're looking at web transaction response time, and this graph is the same period as that graph. This graph has nothing happening on the left-hand side, and it's going absolutely nuts in the middle. This graph is kind of flat. It's around about 40 milliseconds, flat the whole way through. So it was really interesting building this site and trying to get scale and all of the other attributes that change under load to be consistent when the thing goes nuts. So I was really happy with that. So anyway, this thing ran for a while, and then at the end of the week, New Relic sent me a nice email, and they said, hey, here's your availability, 100% uptime. And they do their figures down to 2 decimal places as well, so that's like 100.00% uptime. I got this back after having millions and millions of visitors in a very small period of time. I went, wow, this is interesting. I was not expecting 100%. And I was worried because Azure does all this auto-scaling stuff. So the guys who came to my talk yesterday, you would have seen how I showed the ability to do things like set scales. So say, under certain load conditions, okay? So under, say, a particular condition where the CPU is running out, or if the HTTP queue length is getting too long, you can keep adding instances on, and you can add more and more and more and more and more, and that will support the increase in load. And I was really worried I was going to have to explain to my wife where all the money was going, because the thing just kept scaling out in order to be able to get 100% in this 40 millisecond load time. But at the end of it, I ended up there. And I showed this figure yesterday as well. It cost me $130. And this was servicing up to a couple of million people a day. $130 over what it would normally be, which these days is kind of like a nice dinner out with your partner, right? I mean, it's not much money in the context of running a large-scale website. So I was pretty happy about that. And what I was really happy about was I was down at the snow when the whole thing happened. I was down there, this is me with my son. And we'd ski down the mountain, and then I'd be on the chairlift, and I'd whip out the iPhone, and I could pull up a little RDP session. Try RDPing on a chairlift with gloves. It's really good fun. And actually control these things on the other side of the world. And the cool thing is it was actually resilient in terms of security as well, as far as I know. And we only can ever say that, right? Because there are often incidents we don't know about. But it all seems to have stood up pretty well. Now, incidentally as well, if anyone is interested in how to build stuff like this, after the session, go to the Pluralsight stand and tell them I sent you to get free passes, and they'll give you trials so you can get on and watch this stuff for free, or about 4,000 other things if you're interested. So make sure you grab those from them. But let me draw this back now to security, because this is where I really want to go. And this was why I was sort of wandering around before, asking people if they thought the cloud was secure. How do we feel about this question? Is this a good question? I think it's a terrible question. It's almost like saying, I just bought this new Mercedes. Is it safe? Well, if you run it into a brick wall at 100k an hour, probably not. You know, it is a question of degrees. So when I was walking around before, someone said degrees. And I want to give you a story about someone who asked me this question and what we did in order to demonstrate this afterwards. And then we're going to do demos for the rest of the talk. So I used to work in a very corporate-y role. And I'd spend a lot of time traveling, and I was in China for a piece of work, and we were working on a particular project. It was an internal project. And at the end of it, one of the girls there said, I'd like to see what this Azure thing is. Can you show me the cloud? So I went through and did a lot of the stuff you're going to see today. So creating a new site, configuring it, setting up the database, all this sort of stuff. And she said, oh, that's very, very nice, but is it secure? And I said the same thing. I said, I don't think that's a very good question. Let me demonstrate. So we took the app that we were working on, and they had it running in a test environment, internal test environment. It was the web apps in the browser. So I went to the browser, and we browsed to the site, saw the host name, resolved that to a machine name on the network, and found that we could open up Windows Explorer and browse to the root of the website. So anonymous access on a file share. So why do people do this? Because it's easy. So this is what they've done, anonymous access to a file share. There was a web.config file in there. Who knows what a web.config file is and has when it connects to a database? So it's connecting to the database and the connection string is in there. And they're not using any sort of trusted connection. They're using explicit credentials and it's not encrypted. So when you grab the file, you have the connection to the database. We went to the database and we found that it was connecting with the SA account. Now, who knows what the SA account does? Everything. And people do it because it's easy. Incidentally, and I'll show you later if we have time, but there is a Google Doc you can do where you can search for web.config files on the internet that are accessible over FTP that are connecting to databases with SA. True story. I probably should show you when we're not recording. Ask me later. But you can do that. Anyway, so they were connecting with SA to their test server. But when you have server admin rights on a server, you can do things like look at all the other linked servers, like the linked server to production, where they were copying the production data to the test database on a regular basis because developers need to test with real data, right? So that was the story, and it took probably about 5 minutes before we had all of their production data out of the system. Anyone who could have plugged into this multi-hundred-billion-dollar organisation could have had all of this data out of the system. You simply can't do that hosting with platform as a service in the cloud. There are many different stage gates that would have made that impossible. So the reason I was telling you that in the context of this question is that it is a question of degrees. It's not that it's more secure or less secure, it's differently secure. And the idea today is I want to show you the things that are different. And I'll show you the things that work really well, and I'll show you some things that probably don't work as well. And the answer for you guys when you think about do I put it in the cloud or not, it's also not a Boolean decision. You might put some things in the cloud, you might keep some things on site. You might use multiple clouds. You can mix it up. It doesn't have to be an absolute. So let's do that. Let's start jumping into some demos. And here's what I'm going to do. And who knows how well Azure will behave, because it is the cloud. And as I said at the end of my talk yesterday, sometimes the cloud does actually go down as well, believe it or not. Now, here's the first thing I want to do. So who here presently uses Azure? Okay, so this portal, which is the new portal, which is not the current one because the old one is the current one, if you remember my... I know it sounds very confusing, but this is like the future state, but it's kind of the preview portal. But we're going to live in here because a bunch of stuff I want to do you can only do in the new portal. Okay, so everyone who uses Azure and uses this portal, there's one really, really critical security thing you need to do before you do anything else. And that is go over to account.microsoft.com and go into Security and Privacy, and then go over here to More Security Settings, and then it logs you out. Thank you. What's the bet? It's going to... see if that works. Who knows how many characters you can use in your password for Microsoft passwords? 16. Very close. Who knows why? You reckon? I got no idea. It's just 16. And everyone tells me as though I can do something about it. So I disagree with it as well, but here we are. All right, so when you are in your security settings, go down to two-step verification. I'm going to scroll in on that guy because that is really, really critical. Do not let anyone into your portal managing your things unless they have two-step verification turned on, because you are one reused, disclosed password away from someone coming in and absolutely owning all your things. So that's really, really critical. So there are all these data breaches where we still see plain text passwords disclosed. So I wrote about one a couple of weeks ago. A company called O Web Host. 13 million accounts and plain text passwords. It doesn't matter how good your password is, if it's in plain text and you've reused it and you don't have two-step verification on, Someone just goes to Azure, logs in, now they have all your things. There was a case a few weeks ago where a guy accidentally pushed a GitHub repository public, or rather pushed a Git repository to GitHub as a public repository. Someone grabbed his private Amazon keys and span up like $6,000 worth of infrastructure in absolutely no time. So attackers do look for these sort of things and they will exploit your cloud. Now cloud is awesome because you can do stuff really quickly, and it's terrible because you can do stuff really quickly when you're malicious. So two-step verification. So that one's a really important one. Start with that. Now, once you're in the portal, one of the things you can do with this future state preview portal is configure role-based access controls. Couldn't do it with the old one. So what you want to do is look at some entity on your portal, so for example at the subscription level, and actually go through and assign people into roles. So you should be able to drill down. Whenever you see those two little heads like that, that's what you're looking for, because once you jump into that guy, we can actually start adding people in at that level. Now you can do that at the subscription level, which obviously then covers a whole lot of stuff, or you can drill down into the web app level and pick something like, let's take this one, we're going to look at this in a moment. This is one particular web app. I now want to go in and actually add users at this level, and here are the access rights that we can give to them. So this is good because it allows you to have people that play different roles in the organisation, and you don't necessarily give them access to everything. So just like any sort of role-based access control in any other system, try and use it and apply this principle of least privilege, which is effectively saying give people only what they need to do their job. Someone yesterday relayed a story where they were saying that effectively their CEO, or CIO I think it was, said that they should have the rights to do absolutely anything that their minions could do because they were in charge and they could tell them to do anything anyway, which is terrible because as soon as the CIO gets one bad infection on their machine, then their identity has access to everything. So, principle of least privilege, try and keep all of that locked down. Okay, now here's what we're going to do, because there is a specific exercise. I have a website called hackyourselffirst.troyhunt.com. Now this is an open website. It's got about 50 really, really bad vulnerabilities in it. It's used in a lot of my Pluralsight courses, and they actually walk you through and show you how to use SQL injection or direct object references, all sorts of nasty things. You can go through and muck it up as much as you like. After this talk would be really good. But this is a great site for testing security. Now I have this site running in Azure. I have it sitting in a GitHub repository. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a brand new website. We're going to get this deployed into that website from GitHub, get all the connection strings and stuff set up securely, and get it talking to the database securely as well. So we're going to kick off by actually creating a new web and mobile web app. Now, when I create this web app, I'm going to call it Troy-Ignite, and it should do the little dotty thing around there, and then it comes up with a green tick and says, no one else has got this, I can have it. I'm going to leave all these other defaults here, so it's going to use the existing resource group, the existing web service plan, which is going to put it in West US. Now, if you create a resource on Azure and you put it in the wrong data center, who knows how to move it? Nobody, because you can't. You're screwed. You have to go and recreate it in the new data center, and then you can't use the same name unless you've deleted it first, because the name's unique across data centers, and then you have to set the whole thing up again. So be really, really careful every time you're creating a resource, because I have done this, and you will do it if you create enough resources, where you end up with your database on one side of the country and your website on the other side of the country, and then you go, man, this thing's really slow, isn't it? Because you don't know other than at the point where you create it. It's not like it's in the connection string or anything, it's just a host name. So make sure you get that right. Now, I'm not going to pin this to my dashboard. I'm going to create it, and then I'm going to show you what happens if you do pin. So see, at the moment, my dashboard has got a bunch of unique stuff on it. This won't look like your dashboard. So I've got my CPU time for the last hour. Most of this is for have I been pwned, because that's the thing I'm really interested in. I've got HTTP requests and errors, and then I've got things like the total requests that have gone through table storage, so it was pretty busy early on. It was doing 1,000 odd requests per minute there. And then we have the database utilization. All of this stuff, you can pin any of the panels from any of the blades onto your dashboard. So it's really cool to sort of create this central sort of interface. Okay, so we've got the whole thing creating. And once it is created, we should get a nice little green bar up the top here. So we get that little notification, deployment succeeded. Now, that deployment is now out there. There's all our latest alerts. I can jump over to my web app, go down to Troy-Ignite, and I get a temporary URL like this, and I should have a great big blue screen, which is the default temporary Azure website. So that's the first thing, creating a web app. So who here, just out of curiosity, has created web apps on Azure before? Okay, we're about half, which is cool. So for some of you, it's going to be same old, some of you it'll be new. Okay, so that gives us the web app. And I did this from home before, and my connection dropped out, and I used Telstra, and now Telstra has given me, or Chrome has given me the Telstra Fav icon. I don't have a Telstra Fav icon. Azure doesn't give you a Telstra Fav icon, but that's what we have today. Now, one thing as well, when you create this, I'm going to jump into my settings, and I'm going to look at my app service plan. And what we'll see on my app service plan is there should be about 11 apps running under this plan. Now, yesterday, when I was talking about how I built the Have I Been Pwned service and how to use Azure, one of the things I pointed out is that when you have a basic, a standard, or a premium web site on Azure, you get your own logical server. And you can put as many web apps as you like on that for no extra money. So I've got 11 running on here at the moment. So I've got everything from Have I Been Pwned through to that Hack Yourself First site we just saw and a bunch of other stuff. So users, this is really cool because you can make that dollar really, really stretch. And you can make it stretch as far as your infrastructure will stretch. You can keep putting stuff on there, and then if you set up auto-scale as well, if you put too much stuff on there, it will actually scale out, and now you'll have 2 instances, but maybe you're running 50 websites or something. So that's kind of cool. So let's do this. We're going to collapse this blade, and every one of these vertical columns is a blade. Out of curiosity, so for those who have used this, put your hand up if you've used this new portal. And leave it up if you like the portal. I reckon we're about 3/4. It's interesting. I reckon it would have been about half a year ago. Keeps getting better and faster and improving in all sorts of good ways, which is good news. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just jump back and tour on the website, and we are going to go through and set up continuous deployment. So what I want to do is get this thing deploying out of GitHub, because that's the fastest way that I can get a website onto this new slot. So we're going to choose a source, and I'm going to deploy not from Dropbox. Whilst that undoes itself, one of the neat things you can do is you can actually deploy from Dropbox. So you can have a Dropbox on your machine, dump a whole lot of files in there, and then say, I would like Azure to automatically deploy everything within a certain path into my website from that Dropbox folder, which is actually kind of neat, and I use it as a little file share sometimes. So let's try this again. Let's try GitHub. Now, I've previously authenticated to GitHub, and we can see here that it says authorization Troy Hunt, so it knows it's me. We are going to now go through and choose a project, and I will see all of my private and public repositories on GitHub. So I'm going to go and grab Hack Yourself First, which is exactly the site we saw just before. By default, it will want to deploy from master. You can create a deploy branch or a release branch or whatever you like and deploy from there. But I'm going to keep it simple and say, let's just deploy from master, and we will say OK to that. And now we see the little bar come up on the top right of the screen, setting up continuous deployment. So this is where magic is happening. And basically what happens is Azure runs a service called Kudu. Kudu goes to GitHub, it checks out the code, it compiles it, it grabs all the NuGet packages and things it needs. You don't have to put those into source control, and then it pushes it into your website. Now, while that's happening, you can actually jump in and have a look at how Kudu works on any of your Azure websites. All you do is just after the name of your site and before azurewebsites.net, you put in SCM, like that. And in just a moment, we'll get this, the Kudu environment. And there's a bunch of stuff you can do in here. You can look at a bunch of your settings, your deployments, your files. They've even got little consoles in here, a little command console. So you can open this guy up, you'll see the file structure, you actually get a command window down here. You can go old school and start jumping into stuff. We can go cd site. If you live in a Linux world, you can do that, and it will tell you everything that's in there, which is kind of neat. We can jump into www.root, and at the moment, there's only going to be that original temporary file, hosting-start.html, which is the big blue screen we saw before. So it hasn't deployed yet. The whole process is sitting there running. And if we jump back to here, we can see it says fetch from GitHub, and we've got the little spinny thing going round and round and round and round. Okay, so that is going to take a few minutes to do the first deploy, because it's got to check the whole thing out of GitHub, build it, and push it up there. While we're waiting for that to happen, let's start talking about the database. And then as we get the database set up, we'll start talking about the security of that and how we secure the website to connect to it. Now, to make life easy, I've taken the database from the Hack Yourself First website and I've published it up into Azure. Now, I'm using the Azure SQL Database Service. So this is the PaaS offering, the Platform as a Service database. This is not, I have my own infrastructure and my own full-blown SQL server. This is just the service. Now, it's really easy if you do want to publish a database up to Azure. You jump into SQL Server Management Studio, you right-click on your database, you go to Tasks, and you say Deploy Database to Windows Azure SQL Database. You can also deploy it to a VM if you want to. I'm not going to go through the process again because it is up there. I did go through the whole thing again today when I found I had well and truly screwed up my database before this demo. But this is neat, and it obviously depends on the size of your database, but it's click, 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 wait, and then 10 minutes, 10 hours, however big your database is later, the whole thing is up there in Azure. Makes life very easy. What I'm going to do for now is just jump back to the browser and show you something I prepared earlier in terms of the database. So all I did is I went through New, and then I went through to, loading, loading, loading. I went through to the option about data and storage, and I chose a SQL Azure database. Now, when you create a SQL database, like this guy, you get a new server. But it's a little bit like when you create a website and you get a new server. It's not your own server that you can remote into and control and run. It's just a logical one that you can then create resources on. And of course, the resource on a database server is going to be the database itself. So if I go down to here to my SQL servers, I will see one down the bottom there. We'll give that guy a bit more room. Is SQL Server, SQL Security-Server. The other two are other ones I created. Azure used to give you random names, which was really annoying because I can't remember what both of those do. I know what they do, but I'm just not sure which one is which. So now you get to name your database server, which is much nicer. Now, when we drill down into that database server, we will have the ability to see every database that runs on it. So in this case, we have one database, and that one database is called SQL Security-DB. I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to suffix all of your thing names with the type of thing, but this makes it a little bit easier when we're doing the demo. So I've got SQL Security-Server and SQL Security-DB. And this is the database that we're going to want to connect to the website to. Now, I'm also running this cheap, so it's running on an S0 database, which is about the cheapest standard database I can get. Later on, I might just take it down to a basic one, and then it's going to cost $6 instead of $13 or whatever ridiculously small amount it is. Okay, so while we are waiting here, I'm going to jump over back into SQL Server, and I did actually add this as a server earlier on. So let's see if we can drill down into this server, and we'll see how that goes. All right, let's look at what's going on here. So, can't connect to it. And the reason that we can't connect to it is that this IP address is not allowed. So every time you create a new SQL as a service database in Azure, it whitelists the allowable IP addresses that can connect to it. Now, these are the external IP addresses. So your website or your other asset in Azure can still connect to it. And by extension, if someone else wants to create a web asset or a web thing in Azure, then that thing could connect to it as well, assuming they have the credentials, of course. But this sort of blocks out the ability for any random to come from any external IP address and connect to your things. So what we've got to do is we've got to jump back over into the server itself. Okay, so if we look at the top of our tab here, we can see that it is SQL Security-Server. Now, on that server, we're going to jump into our Essentials, show firewall settings, and we're going to add the current IP address into the firewall settings, because we want to be able to connect to it from where we are here. Now, one of the things with Azure, it was funny actually, I did this talk a few weeks ago, and I was getting all ready to try and remember the IP address and then type it in manually. And you've got to type it in twice, because you've got a start IP address and an end IP address here. And then I went, oh, look at this. We've got a new button, Add Client IP. That wasn't there very recently. And this is what you tend to find with Azure. Like, you go back in and you go, oh, look at that. That wasn't there. It's something new. They moved all the alerts recently. We've got the little green thing with the 3 up the top right at the moment. That used to sit over on the left. So it is still evolving very, very quickly. And for some people, they find it a little bit disconcerting. But I would say that pretty much everything that comes along, it doesn't break what you've been doing already. It just adds something new. And if you look at it as, well, I get new stuff all the time, then it's not too disconcerting. Now, having done that, we should now be able to go back here and double-click on our database. And with any luck, it will open up in our Object Explorer and we'll actually be able to connect. So remember this when you're trying to figure out, why the hell can't I connect to my database? You have to whitelist that IP address. And now we can expand our databases, and we do have one down here called SQL Security-DB. So that's the one we just saw in the portal. All right, so we can connect to our database from SSMS. We deployed our website before. Let's go and see if that's actually working. We can go back to here, and if I take out, well, in fact, what we'll do, since we're here in a console, let's have a look. If we do a dir on that, we've now got other stuff. We've got a lot of stuff that wasn't there before. If you're looking at this and wondering why is there a file called database.back in there, don't do this. Don't back up your database and put it in your website. This is a site designed to show you all these patterns and things you shouldn't do. So if you do go through those Pluralsight courses, you'll see all of the stuff that you have hopefully not seen before, but you definitely shouldn't. So what we can do now is just take out that little SCM from there, jump to the end, take out that, and now our site should load and our site should fail when it tries to load. Who knows why it will fail? Yes? Can't connect to the database. Let's see. I think you're right. I hope you're right. Otherwise, we've got a different problem to deal with. But that is what's going to happen. We will see a yellow screen of death because we've pulled the repository out of GitHub, compiled it, published it. We have not yet told it where the database is. Now, there we go. Should you put connection strings in your source control? No, it wasn't a very emphatic no, though. It was like, I don't think so. No, you shouldn't. You need to work on the assumption that the things you put in source control are, for all intents and purposes, public. Now, you don't want them to be, because certainly things like your source code, an attacker would love to have that, because it gives them a huge amount of information about how the thing's put together. But you work on that assumption that credentials, API keys, things like that, you really don't want going into source control. So what you want to put into source control is things that you would be happy to have released in the public domain. Now, a really easy way of doing this is if you use trusted connections. So particularly in your internal environment, if you're working, say, an Active Directory environment, you can run the IIS app pool under an identity which then has the rights on the SQL database that are required for the app to run. So that would save you the drama. If you've encrypted a connection string with a SQL Server login internally, then you don't worry too much about that. It's an internal login for testing and it's encrypted anyway. What we need to do is we need to make sure that the release process changes the connection string so that it points to the database in the release environment. Now, sometimes you could do this via a continuous integration environment. Sometimes you could do it using things like config transforms if you're using Visual Studio and ASP.NET. The only problem is that you don't want your transform files having the clear text credentials either. When you're in Azure, it becomes real easy because we can do this. We can close all our SQL things, jump into our web app, go down to Troy-Ignite, go into our application settings, and all of our application settings, which is not that one, they're down here, application settings, everything can be configured here. So what we'll see here is you can see app settings, and you can also see connection strings. So often your web.config will have sensitive things in your app settings. They go in here, not in source control. Obviously your connection strings are kind of sensitive. They go in here, not in source control. So here's what we're going to do. Over here in my little notepad instance, I have the name of the connection in my web.config, which is default connection, and I'm copying and pasting this because as soon as you get one character wrong, demos go really, really bad. So that's going to be the name, and then this is the connection string itself. Now this is just a normal old connection string. There is nothing Azure-y special about this. This is the same connection string that you would use on-prem if you had a SQL login. This is not the password you use as well, just in case anyone was thinking about taking my demo and reproducing it. Don't do that. Now that I've whitelisted the IP address of the conference center here, also just avoid connecting to this and blitzing everything until I'm done, if you wouldn't mind. I know how some of you guys think. All right, so let's paste that in there. And incidentally, just before I save this, see how we've got another little option over here called slot setting. Has anyone used deployment slots in Azure? Wow, now that's interesting because there's like 4 people, and before when I asked if anyone's used websites, it was like half the room. So deployment slots, and one of those Pluralsight courses does the whole thing and explains it all in detail, but basically what you can do is decide, I want to deploy into, say, a staging slot. And you go into your staging slot and you make sure it points to your staging database and uses your staging API keys and everything else, and you make sure it all works beautifully. And then you go, yes, this is great, it's been tested, I'm happy with it. Now what I want to do is just swap it with my production slot. And it happens instantaneously because it just binds the host header to a different slot, and it kind of swaps them like that. And by checking this little box that says it's a slot setting, it actually takes the settings over with it. So we could make sure that the production slot was always connecting to the production database, and even when we flicked slots later on, the new code would connect to the right database. So these are actually really cool. Let's do this. Let's go and save. Updating web app settings. Now what this is going to do, it doesn't actually change the web.config on the file system, but it means that every time it tries to use the connection string, Azure will apply the one that we just put in the portal. So if we go back here and reload, if it has all worked correctly, we will now get the proper site. And the joy of this is that we never put the connection string into source control, but it's getting applied automatically, and there it is, it's working. If we redeploy from source control, everything will still work. The same connection string will get applied when the web app tries to connect to the database. So this is a really good way of keeping your sensitive things out of the database. Okay, so that works pretty well. Now there's a different problem. Who has created a SQL Azure database, the SQL as a Service database before? Okay, now can someone tell me what happens when you first create the database? Do you get an account? Yes. And what can the account do? Everything. What should the account not be able to do that the web app is using? Everything. So this is the problem, and this is often this sort of security convenience thing. It is really convenient to go through the web portal and go next, yes, database name, go, take the account, and then put that in your connection string. At the moment, that web app is connecting to the database using the same account as I've got here in SSMS. So I can browse around master, I can create logins, I can do whatever I would like. And the risk, just in case it's not immediately obvious, is that if this web app has a vulnerability such as a SQL injection risk, and an attacker can run arbitrary commands on the database, they're going to run those commands under an identity that has server admin rights. So I, as an attacker, and in fact this web application does have some really, really serious SQL injection vulnerabilities, I, as an attacker, would be able to do things like create new logins. And if I could create a new login, then if I wanted to suck all the data out, I could just open SSMS and connect there and pull the information out. I couldn't open it from outside Azure because the IP address wouldn't be whitelisted, but I could create a new VM in Azure, and then I could connect. So it's back to this thing that I mentioned earlier on, which is the principle of least privilege, which is what we really want to do is make sure that the web app is connecting to the database using an account that only is able to do what it absolutely positively needs to do. So that means we need to actually go and write some TSQL. So here's what we're going to do. I've got a file in here called create login and user, which is a little script. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a login, and this is just normal old SQL Server stuff. Create a login, create a user, create a role, and then add some permissions, and then we're going to update the connection string. Now here's the first thing we're going to do. Now, can anyone tell me, and we'll scroll in a little bit on that guy, will this work? Other than you, because you know a lot about this. What is wrong with this? And I'll give you a hint. It's on the first line. Oh boy, we broke it. Use statement is not supported to switch between databases. I'm showing you this to point out that when you use the platform as Azure implementation, or rather the platform as a service implementation, that is SQL Azure, it is not entirely at parity with SQL Server proper as we know it. Because normally we just do this, right? We just go, oh yeah, we'll just use a use statement, that'll flick the database, and then we'll run all our commands, and then we'll do another use statement down here, and we'll flick back to the other one, and it will be really easy. There are differences. They're not at parity in terms of features. But they're catching up very quickly as well. So very recently, we didn't have support for full text indexing in the Azure platform as a service offering of the database. Now we do. So stuff does keep changing, but they're not exactly the same thing. So what we'll do, just to make our lives easy, is we'll copy that, we'll click on master, we'll take a new query, and then when it stops thinking, we'll just paste that in and run it. And this will create a new login with a horrendous password. And of course, we won't execute the use statement, we'll just do that one. That's great. Now back here on our SQL security database, we're going to create a new user. And then what we're going to do is create a new role. Now, one thing you want to do with your databases, whether it's Azure or anywhere else, is avoid just giving the user the permissions on the database. Whenever you're applying permissions, and we saw this a little bit earlier on with role-based access controls, you want to apply permissions at the role level, and then you can drop users in and out of it. So for something like this, what's neat about it is you can create a role, you can version your database, give that role all the permissions it needs, and then in Azure, you're going to have a different user to the one you have on your local machine when you're developing, or to the one you have on your test server. So it makes it really easy just to keep those permissions self-contained and then apply them to the user you need. So let's do that. I already did that, didn't I? I've already created the role. Let's now do this. Let's add the website user to the website role. And again, I wouldn't normally suffix everything this way, but it makes it a little bit clearer in demos. And then just to make things really, really simple, we're going to give the role data reader, and we're going to give the role data writer. That's kind of excessive. And just in case you're not already familiar with this, you can take an object, and I'll do this locally so it's really quick. We can take something like Hack Yourself First. We can go all the way down to the table level, all the way down to something like the supercar table, jump into our properties and start applying permissions, not just at the table level, but even all the way down to the column level. So if you are really, really serious about your security, you could say the website user, which is the user that basically anonymous people coming to the website are connecting to the database with, it should only be able to read from the supercar table. So this whole app allows you to rate cars that you like. As an anonymous user, you shouldn't be able to go through and create new cars. You should be able to create new ratings or new votes, and you should be able to read the cars, but you shouldn't be able to create them. So you can lock down those permissions a lot further. Now what we'll do is, we've obviously just created this new login with the new user. Let's now get the web app connecting with that new one. So I'm going to go back to my database connection string here. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to copy it out. We'll just put it in a new window here, and we called this one website login. Just like that. And then everything else was the same. So I used a really, really lousy password again. I can paste that back in. One other thing with Azure as well, if ever you're looking at the save button going, why can't I hit the save button? You normally need to lose focus on the field you've just changed, and then the save button comes back. And then you can hit that, And then the little thing goes around, 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 around. That gets applied, and then as soon as that's applied, like that, we can go back here, reload it. And if we got that right, this should work exactly the same. We will see no difference. And it's only if something went really, really badly wrong and we had like a major SQL injection risk that we would get the advantage from what we just did. But this is kind of the defense in-depth approach, right? We just layer upon layer of security. Okay, so that bit has worked. We're now connecting to the database with that new login, and we can all sleep a little bit better because of that. Okay, now let's look at something a little bit different. Has anyone seen dynamic data masking in SQL Azure? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, okay, only a few. So let me explain the value proposition of this. Let's imagine somewhere on our app we have a resource like this, /API, /admin, /users. And we'll see what we get on this resource. Now, again, keeping in mind this is a deliberately vulnerable application. Don't do this. Don't do many things here. So number one, don't store your passwords as plain text. That is bad, and you will end up like AAA Web Host or one of these other ones who get very, very badly owned, and then everybody's passwords are public. So clearly, we don't want plain text passwords. Be that as it may, it makes for a good data masking demo. Something which is probably more relevant is you might have emails in the database. And really, you don't want email addresses being shown in their entirety to the public. Now, of course, that'll depend on the nature of your app. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But it's a good way to demo data masking. So here's what we're going to do. We'll jump back into our SQL databases. We will jump into our SQL Security DB. That blade will think over here. We're going to go into all our settings, which are over here, and we will go down to dynamic data masking. Now, what this is going to do is allow us to define columns within tables where we want to obfuscate the output when data is selected out of them. And we see a few things here. So I'm going to start down the bottom. Recommended fields to mask. So it's gone through and it's looked at my schema and it said, hey, these are a few fields that maybe you don't want to show in their entirety when the data is selected out of the database. So we can do things like say, well, actually, you're right. I would like to mask the password field. And when we do that, it jumps up to here. And what we see is we will see the thing doesn't quite zoom properly when it's off the side. Let's try this. We will see a mask like this, default value mask. I'm going to show you what that looks like. When you create a new data mask, and it's a little bit clearer if you try and add one manually, so the add mask is sort of the manual, I want to choose my table and my column and what my mask looks like, and then those little blue buttons are like, hey, here's some shortcuts that we think you might need. When you add a mask, you'll be able to go through and you'll be able to choose the schema, the table, so let's say it's the make table, here's all the columns in that table. Now here is the masking field that I would like. And what you'll see with the masking field is it's got pre-built patterns. So if you have a credit card in plain text in your database, don't do that, by the way, but hypothetically, if you did, that is the mask it would use. It would obfuscate everything except for the last 4 digits. If you had an email address, it's going to show the first character of the alias, it's going to show the TLD, and it's going to X out everything else. Numbers, which we can't choose here because the column is not a numeric data type, it's a string data type. That would just go through and pick a random number range, or we can have things like a custom string which says you can pad it out with a little bit of obfuscation either side, or default value, which was the one we were on before. And default value just turns integers into zeros, strings into X's, so on and so forth. I'm going to cancel that or discard that one because I don't actually want to add that guy. So we'll get rid of him. But what we will do is let's, what do we do then? We just added in the password. Let's also add a mask for email. We've added both those. Let's save. It's now saving dynamic data masking settings. Okay, so now I'm going to talk while Azure thinks, because one of the things I find, particularly with data masking, is that after making the change, it can take a while before it takes effect. I also found today that after I removed the masks, the setting was actually still there on the database. It wasn't there in the portal. But I was preparing for this only a couple of hours ago, and I was like, why can't I get back to a normal state? And I eventually had to blitz the entire database and restore it. I hope that that was a one-off, but sometimes these things do happen. Now, if that has actually stuck and taken effect, we should be able to go back to where we just were and reload. And how about that? So you see we've got X's now? So the email address now has X's in it, and the password is all X's. So that's the way the masking works. It's actually stopped me from being able to see the raw values. Now, what do you reckon will happen if we go back to SSMS? And let's grab a new window here. And that was, there's a table, select from user profile. Yeah, that one just there. So have a look at, I can't actually zoom in on my results there, can I? You guys can see it from there. No obfuscation. We're not getting obfuscation when we connect to SSMS. So who knows why that is? Yes? Master account. All right. You've done this before, haven't you? All right, so here's what happens. When we go back to our settings here, we'll see that SQL users excluded from masking. Administrators are always excluded. And what that means is that you can have that one reserved administrator account and still actually see your data, which is important because you kind of want to be able to see your data. Yet you can have the other accounts, all the other non-administrator accounts can connect and they'll get that obfuscated masked data, which is actually really handy. It's also another reason why you don't want to use that administrator account when the web app connects to the database, because then you can't really use features like this. Now, another one that someone asked me when I demoed this a few months ago, they were security guys, so they were really quite evil. And what they were saying is, why can't I just go into SQL Server, and what if I did like a substring, and then I tried to piece together the individual aspects of the data in that column and get around the fact that you've got data masking? It doesn't work. It knows that trick. So you can't just go in and start substringing things and joining them back up together. So there should not be a way, and I would actually be really curious to push it a bit further, but in theory, there shouldn't be a way to take that account and run SQL statements that allow you to get data that you have masked. Okay, so that is our data masking, which is kind of cool. Now, there's another thing I want to touch on, and this literally just hit public preview this morning, but hey, demos are going well. Let's just see what happens. Now, this one's actually kind of neat. Let's close this guy out, and we'll see down here, we have auditing and threat detection. Now, we've had auditing on databases for a little while, and what the auditing allows us to do is capture the queries and events that occur in the database, and it dumps it all into table storage in Azure. And if you're in my talk yesterday, you would have seen that table storage is ridiculously cheap, massively, massively cheap. You can't query it like a relational database, but just for storing data, it is awesome. Now, when you turn on auditing, you're going to capture all that data. And incidentally, if you are actually turning on auditing and you're wondering why it's not capturing, you do have to have the security-enabled connection string. Anyone know what a security-enabled connection string looks like? It's pretty easy. You do this. Server.secure. That's a security-enabled connection string. You just whack secure in there. And then it will go through and it will get all the auditing and all that sort of stuff. So you have to have that enabled. And then you can turn on threat detection, which sounds really awesome. And it is actually kind of cool, because what happens is you turn on threat detection and you whack in your email address, and then what happens is when someone tries to SQL inject all your things, you get this. So I turned this on earlier today on the Hack Yourself First database, which is a public one, again, used in my courses, so lots of people are watching it and playing with it. And now I keep getting emails the whole time because they're hammering away at it, trying to SQL inject the database, and I keep getting all these emails saying, hey, there was a potential SQL injection attack detected, which is really neat. It hasn't stopped it, so I'm still screwed, but at least now I know I'm screwed, right? As opposed to finding out later on that I'm on Pastebin and I go, oh, how the hell did that happen? Now, because we've got the auditing enabled, we can now go and look at our table storage as well, and we can see all of the events. So this is the Hack Yourself First database with auditing turned on, and this is all the data that it's capturing. So we can see things like failures. Okay, there's a failure here. Here's the actual statement that failed. And we can go and grab that statement and put it into something where we can actually see what's going on, such as my notepad window down there. Whoop. And that's what was run. And what's actually happened is everything from here on is a SQL injection attack. Now, I, as an auditor or a security-conscious developer, would be able to look at this and actually figure out what was going on. And I would be able to then understand, did that possibly return data which then could have been exfiltrated out of the system? And this is what SQL injection attacks tend to look like. So this one is inevitably trying to convert a string to an integer which will cause an exception, and then they want to see that exception bubble up in the interface and actually get data out of the system. So statements like that are very, very easy to then pull passwords and things. Not a topic we have time for today, but that I thought was really cool, and it just hit public preview. So go and have a good look at that one too. Okay, so I want to have a look at a couple of other things around SSL in Azure. So we're going to sort of move away from databases and so on for a moment. Let's start here. So we're on our website. What you can do, and in fact you'll see, I wonder why it's already done it for me. Normally, people will load these things up. In fact, we'll go this way. Let's go back to our web app, into Troy Ignite, and we'll load up the site. And normally you load it up and it's HTTP. Now, as that other window actually just showed, all of these temporary URLs do also have HTTPS. Now, this is not something that you're going to run publicly with. You're not going to run a temporary Azure websites.net URL publicly. Ask me about someone who did that recently and hard-coded it into terminals. We'll talk about that offline. Many hundreds of terminals that couldn't be remotely updated. But you can use it for testing. Now, who knows why I don't have a green HTTPS? I don't have a green padlock. Certificate? No, it could be certificate. It's not actually certificate. Let's have a look. Connection. Now, the reason it's not, I'm going to show you why it's not certificate in a moment, but the reason here is further, this page includes other resources which are not secure. So recently Chrome, and Chrome's getting really good at this. Google are really, really pushing Chrome very hard to really get in your face when a website is not secure. And what used to happen is if you loaded a website over HTTPS, so the page itself is secure, you've got confidence in the integrity, in the authenticity, and in the confidentiality, so no one has been able to change it, listen to it, and you are talking to who you think you are. So the page was good. But then if you put an image on it over HTTP, then you can't trust the image. So Chrome didn't want to just give you all green and everything. What they did is they put a little red line. So you still had the padlock and they put the little red line. And then a few weeks ago they went, well, what we're going to do is we're just going to take away your padlock altogether. So now you get no padlock, you get no green. And in fact, in the future, Google has already proposed that what Chrome will start doing is that anything HTTP will be explicitly flagged as insecure. You'll get some sort of a red symbol or a strike or something like that, which is a really good reminder of why you want to start moving everything to HTTPS now. Anyway, here's the point of why I showed you this. You do get a certificate on every single Azure website. And in fact, what the certificate is it's a wildcard certificate for Azure websites.net. So when we have a look at this, you can see star.azurewebsites.net. So you can create a new website on Azure and immediately start talking to it over HTTPS. You wouldn't redistribute the Azure websites.net domain or URL, but you get the certificate. Now, there's another thing I can show you on this, which I can show you now, but I couldn't show you a few months ago. Let's copy that. We'll go to SSL Labs. Anyone used SSL Labs? Only a few. Wow, okay. So SSL Labs is really, really awesome because what you can do is you can go to this guy, paste in a URL, and go run. And what it's going to do is it's going to go away and look at every single aspect of the HTTPS implementation of this site. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that there are a lot of different attributes to the way, won't say SSL, and I'll explain why, but the way transport layer security is done on a website. And SSL is one of them. So SSL is the thing that we had predominantly since the early 90s. We went through SSL 1, 2, 3, and then we went, okay, there's something better. And in 1999, we got TLS. And we went through TLS 1.1, 1.2, or 1.0, 1.1, and now on 1.2. So there are various different versions of HTTPS over a secure connection. So that's the first thing. There are also many different differences in things like the cipher suites that are used in the HTTPS implementation, the hashing algorithms that are used in some of the signatures. And what this site does is it goes through and it pulls it apart and goes, this is everything that's good, everything that's bad. And what's nice about Azure is out of the box you'll get an A grade. If you go and get your own certificate and you put that on an Azure website, you still get an A grade. Conversely, would you consider it a positive attribute to have bank grade security? Just as a, like if your manager came to you and said, you know what I'd really like? I'd like some bank grade security. Does that mean good or does that mean bad? Bad, oh, interesting. Okay, well, you probably knew I was going to say that. Troy Hunt, bank grade security. So here's one of the interesting things. This is kind of tangential to Azure, but it's kind of interesting. What you can do with SSL Labs is you can go through and see how other websites implement their HTTPS. It's not like you're penetration testing them. You're just seeing how would the website like to communicate with browsers. What do they support? What do they not support? Because there's a bunch of really old deprecated stuff that's now really weak. So a little while back, I thought what I really should do is go through and see how the banks go, because I keep hearing people say bank grade security like it's a really good thing. So I went and tested them. And they're crap. They're really, really bad, which is just amazing. Incidentally, just after I wrote this, some of them went, that doesn't look real good, maybe we should fix it. They probably could have worked that out themselves, but here we are. But really there's 2 points there. So number one, go and test your SSL implementation with SSL Labs. And number two, when you do use Azure straight out of the box, it's actually pretty solid in terms of HTTPS. Now, there's one more thing we might look at, because we're trying to all go HTTPS and make all our things as secure as we can. If we look at Azure website, costs, that'll get us where we want to go. Now, often when we're building things with cloud, part of the promise of cloud is that it's cheap, right? We can get into it for just about nothing. And you might look down at the pricing of Azure websites, and when this eventually loads, what we will see is we have free, which is self-explanatory. We have shared, which is pretty cheap. It's less than $10 a month. And you're sharing infrastructure when you're on a shared level. Once we actually start to step it up, so where are we? Ooh, hasn't loaded. What are my prices? All right, just believe me. So when we go shared, it is about $10 a month. Okay, so it's pretty cheap. If you want to step up to the next plan, though, you go to Basic. And Basic is around about 60-something bucks a month, and then it goes north from there. And a lot of people have looked at shared and go, I'm happy with shared. I'm happy with something that doesn't need to have the same availability assurances as the thing that costs 6 times as much, but I want HTTPS, I want SSL. And you don't get SSL on a shared plan. You do if you do this. You can always go and just put in HTTPS on the Azure website's address, but what if you want to host your own domain name, which you can do on shared, and you want HTTPS? Well, here's a trick. This is kind of neat. Every time people see this, they go, wow, that's really cool. Who's used Cloudflare? Just a few again. So Cloudflare, well, actually, the answer is everyone. Everyone has used Cloudflare. You just may not have known it, because they're basically the largest property on the web. It's always either them or Facebook, depending on how you look at the traffic. Cloudflare serves 5 trillion requests a month. When you go and get the thing from Pluralsight later on, they've got a course on that which shows you how to set all of this up, and the statistics are just nuts. But what they do is they wrap around your website, and you can go and get Cloudflare for free. And all you do is you create your website, you go to Cloudflare and you'd say, I would like to add my website. And they say, okay, what's your domain name? And you put that in, and it goes away and it gets all of your DNS records, and it says, this is what we think your DNS records should be. Are you happy? And you say, yes, I'm very happy with that. And they say, okay, now go to your registrar and change the name server so that it's us. And that's it. And it's literally 5 minutes. And what's happening now is that they're doing your DNS. They are passing any request through their infrastructure then onto your website, and they give you a certificate for free. So you can wrap Cloudflare around just about anything. And it is free, and it is 5 minutes to set up. There are different levels of encryption, so at the very least you can encrypt from the client to Cloudflare, and then everything behind that might be in plain text. You can encrypt from the client to Cloudflare, and then encrypt from Cloudflare to the origin, but it doesn't validate the certificate. So if you're on Azure, you can say, I want you to connect through to the website, which is azurewebsites.net. Or you can actually encrypt all the way through. So you encrypt to Cloudflare, and then it re-encrypts again back to your origin. All of these are free. The only problem with that last one is it's predicated on you actually having SSL on the origin, which is kind of the reason we're using Cloudflare in the first place. So that's really neat, and it is just a 5-minute job. The internet is really misbehaving, so I'm not going to bother logging in and showing how to set that up. But it's as simple as I've said. So that's really neat. So you do get strong HTTPS out of Azure when you're using basic or shared, and you can have your host name on there. You can get it for free anyway when you're using basic or standard, you can get it for free anyway when you're on shared. And that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of what I really wanted to cover, but I also want to leave time for some Q&A. And I'm hoping we have some Q&A. So has anyone got any questions I want to ask about anything here? Yeah.
So my question relates to masking of SQL data. If you mask the SQL data so that you can't actually read it, then what's the point of having it in the database anyway? Because you're going to want to access that data for some reason, otherwise it wouldn't be there.
Okay, good question. So what he's saying is, what's the point of having the data anyway if you're just going to mask it, right? Which is a good question, but you've got to remember you can mask for some accounts but not mask for other accounts. So it's really going to depend on the design of your app. But you might say, I want anyone to be able to come and add an email address to a system, but then I only want administrators to be able to see the email address. Or maybe you say, look, there's going to be some other back-end process somewhere else downstream. It's not that you're necessarily planning to show it through the website. Again, you might want to do it just as a security measure, so if anyone SQL injects your system, they can't actually get the data back out anyway. Yes?
Follow up on that. Can you do separate masking for separate users but switch? So like he can see passwords but not emails. He can't see emails.
Oh, good question. So can you do separate masking for separate users? No. Unless I'm missing something, because really, and we'll go back to the interface for a second, it really is that straightforward. That is about all you get on the interface. Why do you keep doing that? Connection's gone. It was just what I showed you, which is here is your database, and here are the masking rules you can apply to any non-administrative or non-privileged accounts. And actually, if this does behave again, you'll notice that in there, it's not just your existing master account. You can actually go through and say, these are other logins which I would like to be privileged. So if we go back to there, dynamic data masking, and the column that will, or rather the thing here, is we can actually have other SQL users in here. You know, administrators are there by default, you can add other ones, but you can't kind of go that fine-grained yet. Who knows? All right, so that's interesting. So the talk earlier said it's built into SQL 2016. So without actually being a database guy and only knowing what I see when I go to talks, I have seen a lot of stuff coming in 2016, which I saw in Azure. And originally I was going, well, this just shows how awesome platform as a service is. And then it's like, yeah, we'll just add it into the mainstream thing as well. But it's interesting, isn't it, how Azure is kind of the leader for these, and then the classic sort of big guy follows. Yes? Does the masking stop you from inserting? No, it just masks the output. Yeah, right at the back. Oh, good question. So who's heard of Azure Key Vault? So I actually went to a really interesting talk on Azure Key Vault at the MVP Summit just a few weeks ago. And everything they said there was in the public domain anyway, but basically there is this concept of a hardware security module. And this is a serious piece of equipment which just cryptographically stores things, because one of the problems we have with security is protecting secrets. So someone breaks, I mean, let's say you've encrypted all your credit cards. Someone breaks into your system, they totally own it. In theory, the credit cards are encrypted. But in practice, you've got a private key somewhere, right? So if they get the private key, then you're totally owned anyway. So the whole idea of a hardware security module is you actually have a dedicated device which does the key management, and then there are a lot of strict controls around how it can be accessed. So the idea of the Azure Key Vault is that you have a very strongly secured location within Azure where you can put secrets. Now, there are a couple of problems with it at the moment, and this is sort of what we were pushing with when we were in Redmond. One, it's only accessible via PowerShell, which is not necessarily a problem, depending on your perspective, but the draggy, droppy, whizzy-wiggy sort of stuff we've done here is not as easily accessible. Two, we would really like to see it easily integrated into things like, say, connection strings. So it'd be great if you could never actually see the credentials on your connection string. But you can at the moment. We don't have that integration yet. So it looks really good. I think it's either, maybe Simon knows, is it still in preview mode? Yes, he's saying. So it is still in preview mode as well. So you got to keep in mind that often when stuff is in preview mode, it's not as polished as what we'd like the entire new portal, which is the preview portal. And then over time, it sort of matures and becomes more available. But it's early days. If you want to play with it in PowerShell, that's cool, but there's a lot of stuff you can't yet do that I'd really like to be able to do with it. Other questions? Yep. What about other storages? Okay, so obviously we have document DB, we have table storage, queue storage, file storage, blob storage. How do you restrict access to them? So for things like Azure storage, and for context, when we look at Azure storage, the four main things that we have there are obviously files, blobs, queues, and tables. And basically you have a primary and a secondary key, which you can use to access that. I mean, there's a host name, then there's a key. You can rotate those keys if you like, but whatever goes into there is sort of up to you. You can encrypt the things that you put in there before they get inserted. But look, to be honest, for the most part, they're pretty basic storage constructs. There's a reason SQL Azure costs like 20 times more than table storage. It's because it has all this other stuff, right? All right, anyone else? Okay, well, look, thank you very much for coming. Do go and visit Pluralsight and make sure you get some freebies off them as well. Any other questions? I'm on Twitter as Troy Hunt, and I am obligated to show you. Please fill out the eval slides as well. Thanks very much for coming.